So, what's going on with food prices? Hi, I'm Mark with Best of Us Investors. I've been investing for 40 years and would like to share some of my insight with you today. I'm not here to tell you what to invest in, but to provide you with some information that may help you become a better investor. Please hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel if you appreciate this content. Remember, this is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice. Okay, let's get started. Over the past year, we've all experienced inflation, most notably gas prices. However, there's also been an increase in the price at the grocery store. With the advent of Russia invading Ukraine, I believe there'll be some more pain and some shortages due to the supply disruption in wheat. Corn and soybeans will also be affected, but for the focus of this video, we'll be focusing on the wheat situation. At the end of the video, I'll go over some investment ideas that may be helpful to you depending on your risk tolerance and investment horizon. Let's just start with talking about, what is a commodity, and we're talking about wheat. So commodities are more than wheat. Commodities are another class of assets, just like stocks and bonds. Most commodities are products that come from the earth that possess uniform quality, are produced in large quantities, and by many different producers. So major commodities include cotton, oil, gas, corn, wheat, oranges, gold, uranium. Basically, they're the raw materials needed by large manufacturing companies in order to run their businesses. So it's believed that commodities of the same type can be interchanged for as long as they are the same grade. For example, a company that manufactures chocolates can buy cocoa produced in Ghana or in Cameroon and still produce the same quality of chocolates. There are three main types of commodities that we look at. The first one is agricultural. Agricultural commodities are those such as coffee, corn, which is an important source of food for livestock, humans, sugar, soybeans. Soybeans whose oil is used for making crackers, breads, cakes, and cookies, and wheat, which is one of the most important food crops of the world, which is why we're focusing on it. Second commodity is energy. Energy commodities include crude oil used in transportation activities and productions of plastics, natural gas used for electricity generation, and gasoline, which powers light-duty trucks and cars. And then we have metals. Metals include gold used in making jewelry, silver used for jewelry and other industrial uses, copper really used in the form of electrical wiring and such. And a little bit about how commodities are traded. Most commodities are traded on commodities exchanges, which include the New York Mercantile Exchange, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, the Kansas City Board of Trade, Minneapolis Grain Exchange, and the Chicago Board of Trade. So investors may opt for indirect exposure through stocks such as exchange-traded funds and mutual funds, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Whether we know it or not, commodities are an important part of our everyday life. And not only are they part of our everyday life, they're also a part of the Consumer Price Index categories. You can see the categories are grouped by food, energy, commodities, housing, healthcare, transportation, and other expenses. If you look, housing is the largest part of the index at about 33%, followed by commodities. So when the price of commodities go up, which are quite volatile, they do affect what we spend every day, either at the grocery store or at the gas station. So it's important as investors to understand what commodities are and how it affects your investments and how it affects your daily life. So the CPI measures two commodities, and they call it with wild price swings, food and energy commodities, oil and gasoline. These products are traded constantly on the commodities market, and traders can bid the prices up or down based on news like wars in oil-producing countries, wars in countries that produce wheat, such as Ukraine and Russia. The CPI often reflects those price swings as a result. So in their infinite wisdom, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has created another category of CPI called the core, which they eliminate the problem of volatile food and energy prices by excluding them, because they don't want you to see what the real inflation cost is of your food and your gas, even though you see it every day when you go to the pump or you go to the grocery store. So the Fed has considered the core CPI in the past when deciding whether to raise the Fed funds rate, which is the interest rate for overnight loans between banks, The core CPI is useful because food, oil, and gas prices are volatile and the Fed's tools are slow acting. The other thing you need to realize is that this affects consumers. So even though it's not in the core CPI rate, the consumers feel it. We feel it every day when we go to the gas pump or we go to the grocery store. And so that means they have less money to spend. They have less money to spend. They have less money to spend on discretionary items, which does affect the economy. And as investors, that's what we really want to talk about. So we're going to talk specifically about wheat as a commodity and what wheat is and why it's important in the global world right now and what's going on. So wheat is a highly nutritional and widely cultivated cereal grain. For over 7 centuries, wheat has been raised and harvested in many countries around the world. It's one of the world's most important crops and holds the title of the second most produced grain in the world, beaten only by corn. So what are the uses of wheat? Well, normally you just think of bread and think of wheat, but the main demand for wheat comes from human consumption. In fact, over 2/3 of wheat produced globally is used as food. It contains many vitamins, minerals, which make it a staple food product. It's used primarily in premium bread making, general purposes bread making, biscuit, cake making, and as animal feed. And although foodstuff represents the main use of wheat, it also has several alternative uses. The gluten and starch presented in wheat make it elastic and able to bind water. This makes wheat useful for products like paper, where the starch from wheat is used to improve the strength of the paper. The United States paper manufacturing industry uses over 5 billion pounds of starch every year. Pharmaceuticals. Wheat gluten is used in the pharmaceutical industry to create capsules. Adhesives. The adhesive on the back of your postage stamp is created with wheat starch. And soaps. Wheat germ, which contains lots of vitamin E, is commonly used in soaps and in creams. Wheat is also used to produce bioethanol, but plays a small role in this compared to crops like corn. Next, let's look at world wheat production as counted by how much wheat is actually planted per country by rank. And we'll look at the top 10 countries and how many metric tons they produce. And this data came from 2019, 2020. China ranked number 1 at 133.5 million metric tons, represented 17.46% of the total world wheat production. Number 2 is India, 103.5 million metric tons, accounted for 13.54% of total world wheat production. Russia comes in number 3, 74.5 million metric tons, representing about 9.73% of total world wheat production. United States, 52.5 million, comes in number 4, 6.87% of total world wheat production. Number 5 is France, 40.5 million metric tons, about 5.31% of the total world wheat production. Canada comes in at number 6, 32,500,000 tons, metric tons, 4.25% of world wheat production. Ukraine, 28.3 million metric tons, ranked number 7, just under 4% of the total wheat production. Pakistan, number 8, 24.3 million metric tons, accounts for 3.18% of the total world wheat production. Germany, number 9, 23.62 million metric tons, accounts for about 3% of world wheat production. And rounding out the top 10 is Argentina, which is just a little under 20 million metric tons, or 2.5% of the total. So the total world production of wheat is 764, almost 765 million metric tons. The top 10 producing countries that we just went over account for almost 70% of global wheat production. If you look and combine Ukraine and Russia, you would have about 14% of world wheat production. So if Russia took over Ukraine and took over their production and production remained the same, they would have 14%, as opposed to when we look at Canada and the U.S., if Canada and the U.S. combined are about 11% of the production worldwide of wheat. And China, of course, is almost 18% of the world wheat production. So if Russia took over Ukraine and took over their production, those two countries, China and Russia, would control about 31.5% of the total world wheat production. According to Statista.com, global production of wheat worldwide is estimated to be at 774.87 million metric tons. Consumption is expected to be between 2021 and 2022 of 787.4 million metric tons. So we're already in a shortage situation just by estimates, and that doesn't even include the Ukraine and Russian conflict. So let's take a look at the global effects of the war in Ukraine is having, not only on wheat, but the global food production in general. So this is an article from the New York Times. The war in Ukraine has delivered a shock to global energy markets. Now the planet is facing a deeper crisis, a shortage of food. A crucial portion of the world's wheat, corn, and barley is trapped in Russia and Ukraine because of the war, while an even larger portion of the world's fertilizers is stuck in Russia and Belarus. The result is that of a global food and fertilizer prices are soaring. Since the invasion last month, wheat prices have increased by 21%, barley by 33%, and some fertilizers by 40%. The story continues. Ukrainian farms are about to miss critical planting and harvesting seasons. European fertilizer plants are significantly cutting production because of high energy prices. Farmers from Brazil to Texas are cutting back on fertilizer, threatening the size of the next harvest. So the leading producer of wheat in the world is China. And according to the article, China is facing its worst wheat crop in decades after severe flooding, is planning to buy much more of the world's dwindling supply. And India, which ordinarily exports a small amount of wheat, has already seen foreign demand more than triple compared with last year. While virtually every country will face higher prices, some places could struggle to find enough food at all. Armenia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Eritrea have imported virtually all their wheat from Russia and Ukraine and must find new sources. But they are competing against much larger buyers, including Turkey, Egypt, Bangladesh, and Iran, which have obtained more than 60% of their wheat from the two warring countries. And all of them will be bidding on an even smaller supply because China, the world's biggest producer and consumer of wheat, is expected to buy much more than usual on world markets this year. On March 5th, China revealed that severe flooding last year had delayed the planting of a third of the country's wheat crop, and now the upcoming harvest looks bleak. A lot of people think this is just going to mean that their bagels are going to become more expensive, and that's absolutely true. But that's not what this is all about, said Ben Isaacson, a longtime agricultural analyst with Scotiabank. Since the 1970s, North Africa and the Middle East have grappled with repeated uprisings. What actually led to people going into the streets and protesting, he said? It starts from food shortages and from food price inflation. We'll conclude with, for the global food market, there are few worse countries to be in conflict than Russia and Ukraine. Over the past 5 years, they have together accounted for nearly 30% of the exports of world's wheat, 17% of the corn, 32% of barley, a crucial source of animal feed, and 75% of sunflower seed oil, an important cooking oil in some parts of the world. In addition, Russia is the largest fertilizer exporter, providing about 15% of the world's supply. This month, just as farmers around the world prepared for planting, Russia told its fertilizer producers to halt exports. Sanctions already were making such transactions difficult. Sanctions also have hit Russia's closest ally, Belarus, a leading producer of potash-based fertilizers, critical for many major crops, including soybeans and corn. But even before the Ukraine war, Belarus fertilizer exports were blocked because of sanctions over its seizure, an expatriate dissident who had been a passenger in a Ryanair jetliner forced to land within the country. Even outside of Russia, in another ominous signal to fertilizer customers earlier this month, European fertilizer producers said they were slowing or halting production because of soaring energy prices. Many fertilizers are made with natural gas. The world's major fertilizers have now more than doubled or tripled in price over the past year. Brazil, the world's largest producer of soybeans, purchases nearly half of its potash fertilizer from Russia and Belarus. It now has just 3 months of stockpiles left. The National Soybean Farmers Association has instructed members to use less fertilizer, if any, this season. Brazil's soybean crop is already diminished by a severe drought. So what about the U.S.? Maybe we can help. Well, according to the USDA analysis and data from the U.S. Drought Monitor, 71% The U.S. winter wheat areas are in areas of drought as of February 8th, up slightly from what was reported last month in the Wheat Outlook publication. Much of this area covers key wheat growing regions of western Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Texas. Drought conditions could leave some crops susceptible to damage if protective snow cover is not in place during periods of prolonged cold temperatures. Low temperatures have been reported in some of these areas, but the full effect of these conditions is not yet known. Further, white wheat production areas in the Pacific Northwest are still experiencing prolonged drought and dry conditions after last year's crops substantially. Here's a picture of the winter wheat areas in drought in the United States. You can see in the red approximately 71% of the winter wheat production is within areas experiencing drought. Let's take a look up in Canada and see if they can help us out with this wheat situation since they produce 4.5% wheat. Unfortunately, the dispute between Canada's second largest railroad and the labor union caused a work stoppage Sunday, interrupting shipments of farm goods and inputs to and from the United States. More than 3,000 rail conductors, engineers, and yard workers are on strike, and trains have been halted across Canada after both sides couldn't reach a deal by midnight deadline. The shutdown threatens to upend a major agricultural supply chain, disrupting the movement of grain, coal, and potash for fertilizer at a time when commodity prices are already soaring. The impacts to our industry and North American farmers could be devastating, a coalition of 22 farm groups wrote in a letter to President Joe Biden. Grain is Canadian Pacific's largest business, according to the Railway's investment documents. Grain constitutes 24% of the company's business. Of the 480,100 train carloads of grain Canadian Pacific ships annually, 24%, or 115,224 loads, are U.S. grain, much of which the railroad carries to export terminals. The U.S. also imports Canadian grain via the railway. For example, according to the National Grain and Feed Association, about 90% of oats milled out of the U.S. are imported from Canada. In addition, the U.S. relies on Canada for 86% of its potash fertilizer supply, according to the Fertilizer Institute. In 2020, Canada was the world's #1 potash producer. Russia was second. Canadian Pacific carries potash from mines in Saskatchewan to the U.S. fertilizer shipments make up more than 10% of the railroad's business. According to investor documents, the company also carries other fertilizers: phosphate, urea, ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, and hydrous ammonia. So it looks like we're not going to get any help from Canada. They're having some issues with transportation and transporting of all kinds of commodities. So what can we do? As investors, can we see out of this situation that might help us in our investment future? There are three things that we really looked at. We were looking at commodities, mostly wheat, but soybean, corn are also in a situation with Russia and Ukraine, and we're going to see shortages of those. In addition, we're going to see shortages basically of fertilizer. So what can we do in the fertilizer area? Is there any opportunity there? And then the third is just food in general. Who produces the food? Who are our big food producing companies? And maybe some of those would be an opportunity for some type of investment in the future to take advantage of some of these issues that are caused by worldwide issues in war and drought. So let's take a look at a few. So what can we as an investor do, knowing that there's going to be a food shortage, fertilizer shortage coming up, based on information that we investigate and do our due diligence on? Well, there's three areas that we could really look at. Number one is food processing companies. Number two is fertilizer companies. And number three is commodity ETFs. So first, let's look at food production companies. Food production is a massive industry that makes and processes a variety of foods, including milled grains and oilseeds, dairy products, seafood, baked goods, meat, fruits and vegetables, and candy. So let's take a look at the top 10 production food companies by revenue. Starting with number 10, Darling Ingredients, symbol DAR. Sanderson Farms, SAFM. Ingredion, INGR. Seaboard, SEB. Anderson's, ANDE. Corteva, CTVA. General Mills, GIS. CHS, CHSCP. Tyson Foods, symbol TSN. And Archer Daniels Midlands, symbol ADM. These aren't the only food companies out there, so you can do your own search to find companies that may fit your time horizon and risk tolerance. These may be better than the stocks I've outlined here, so do your own due diligence and know what you own. Number 2, fertilizer companies. There are 6 main fertilizer producers that are widely traded on the U.S. Stock Exchange. CF Industries, symbol CF, Agrarium Inc., symbol AGU, Mosaic Company, symbol MOS, Potash Corporation, symbol POT, Terra Nitrogen, symbol TNH, and Intrepid Potash, IPI. While they all operate producer fertilizers, each are exposed to different fertilizers and sometimes to different businesses within the supply chain. So again, do your due diligence before you buy any of those companies. The third thing we'd look at are commodity ETFs. These are ETFs that invest in the futures of certain commodities. So we'll go over 3. The first one is the wheat ETF, symbol WEAT. The second is the corn ETF, symbol CORN. And the last is soybeans ETF, SOYB. These provide investors an easy way to gain exposure to agricultural commodities futures. Now, these are volatile and have a larger expense ratio, so do your own due diligence and only invest a small percentage of your portfolio in these products if you choose to do so. Certainly do not bet the farm on these, and as always, do your own due diligence. I know investing in agriculture is certainly not very exciting. However, business cycles change, and events can provide investors opportunities if you're able to look ahead and put pieces of the puzzle together. Of course, prior to investing in any security, make sure it fits within your time horizon and risk tolerance. Also, don't invest in something based on hope. Hope is not a strategy. Know what you own and why you own it. That's all I have this week. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Thanks, and see you next week.